The following is a special presentation from WALB News 10. Live from Albany State University's West Campus, this is the King Celebration.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome those of you joining us live on WALB to the 24th Annual King Day Celebration Dinner. We're here at Albany State University West Campus, and we've been celebrating the lifelong contributions of two community leaders. Judge Denise Marshall and Jeff Bodine Sr. were this year's recipients of the Martin Luther King Jr. Dream Awards. Each year, we identify those whose lives and works exemplify the ideals of Dr. King, and we honor them and celebrate Dr. King's lives and his work and his mission of social change and civil rights equality for all. Judge Marshall and Bodine, thank you for all of you do for Albany and all you do for this state. President Marion Frederick is here with us tonight, and I want to thank her for opening up the campus of Albany State and hosting us again. We were here last year as well on the East Campus. This is a wonderful venue, and we appreciate all you do for Albany and all Albany State does for this community as well. Tonight's speaker is another great Georgian and one that I'm proud to call a friend. Currently the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court, I met our speaker when he and I first walked onto the campuses of the University of Georgia Law School in the fall of 1988. We had the same classes during the day and participated in several courts early on, the basketball court and the tennis court. We've had a number of intramural sports that we played, and I was able to view firsthand his competitive spirit, but always his gentlemanly character, and that shone through brightly. He performed well in the classroom as well, despite overcoming the fact that he was a graduate of Auburn University, where he was also the student body president. After graduation, he joined the state law department working under two different attorneys general, and one of those attorneys general recommended him to then Sonny Perdue governor and suggested that the governor should look at hiring Harold Melton as his executive counsel, which he did. And when the opportunity came for Governor Perdue to make an appointment to the Supreme Court, he selected now Chief Justice Harold Melton, who he had witnessed firsthand perform very capably on many important issues that affected this state. He has served on our court for almost 14 years and was sworn in last year as Chief Justice, and he will serve in that capacity for 4 years. This is not his first trip to Albany. Last year, he and the court came here to hold court, where they were also hosted by Albany State University. The East Campus auditorium was full of students, and from high school and college both, who witnessed oral arguments on several cases, and it was very informative and educational for all. He is active in his community and serves on the board of the Atlanta Youth Academies and is on the local and national board of the Young Life Youth Ministries. He is married to his wife, Kimberly, and they have 3 children. Please join me in welcoming the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Georgia, Harold Melton, to the Martin Luther King dinner.
Thank you. Please be seated. Thank you so much. Thank you, Judge Hodges. I got to get used to saying that. As Judge Hodges mentioned, we were buddies in law school and still are. And And who would have thought in school that we would be before you as justice and judge? But it is good to be here, and to the elected officials, Mayor Hubbard, to the judges, Judge Marshall, you make us proud. Mr. Bodine Sr., congratulations on this wonderful recognition. As Judge Hodges mentioned, the Supreme Court was down in Albany just last November, and as a part of our visit, we had the opportunity to tour the Civil Rights Museum, and we were fascinated to see and hear the significance of Albany citizens and the role that you played and your forefathers played in the Civil Rights Movement. And I want to take a look at Dr. King. I want to take a look at his legacy, but I'm intimidated by doing that in the midst of folks who may have even been a part of that movement. If you were a part of that movement at all, would you please raise your hand? Wow. Thank you. And I want to make a deal with you. Don't correct me, please. I say that out of respect for you. I recognize you, and I'm trying to give honor to what you've accomplished and what you did during that time period. But maybe afterwards, if y'all want to talk with them, and y'all can validate whether what I'm saying is correct. But we're going to do a dive into history. And when you talk about Dr. King, it's really important to do a dive into history, because one of the things that's happened is that the further in time we get removed from the heyday, from the apex, the message of Dr. King gets more and more concentrated into a bumper sticker. And right now the bumper sticker says, Martin Luther King, nonviolent social change. Martin Luther King, nonviolent social change. That's true. He did stand for nonviolent social change, but was there more to it? I think yes. The other thing that happens when we think about Dr. King, we think about his charisma, we think about his charm, we think about his great oratory skills. But was there more to Dr. King? And I think yes. And so I want to unpack that and see if we can understand the fuller picture of what he represented and why he did what he did the way he did it. And to do that, we have to understand that nonviolent social change was a very strategic tool towards the goal that he wanted to accomplish. And it had practical application as a result of his spiritual beliefs. Now, we know he was a doctor. Do we remember what he was a doctor of? He had a PhD in systematic theology. He was a minister of the Christian church. And so when you start unraveling and unpacking what it is he believed in and how he saw what was going on in our country, it necessarily requires us to look into his faith and his belief system. And so we have to keep his spiritual construct in mind as we look forward, and it requires some form of a frank discussion about his faith. But when you chose to recognize Dr. King, you understood that. And so I assume that you give me permission to do that. So the portion of Dr. King's vision that I want us to explore tonight is the end game, the goal. What was it that he was striving for? And we often, again, think back on the social aspects of what he was trying to accomplish. We know that he had social goals. We talk about sitting at lunch counters and going to movie theaters and sitting on buses and things along those lines. Those are the things we talk about. But we also talk about education, the segregated schools and the access to resources. And we talk about the financial aspects of what he was trying to accomplish, job opportunities, and representation in our government, our local government, our state government, and our national government. And we talk about all these things, but there's more. There's more. The ultimate and highest goal I want to submit to you was to redeem the soul of the country. It was much bigger than where we sat on the bus, where we ate lunch. It was about redeeming the soul of our nation. His concern was for the hearts and the well-being of every citizen in this country. How do I prove that? We know the portion of his speech that he gave at the mall in Washington, D.C., where he said, I have a dream. He said, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, that the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to do what? Sit together at the table of brotherhood. That was no casual phrase. That really represented an objective that reflected a heart change in our nation, the ability to sit together at the table of brotherhood. Sit together at the table of brotherhood. Why was this important? Well, to understand the importance of that objective, we have to understand what Dr. King saw and what anybody would see if you took a step back, elevated to 50,000 feet, and looked at what was happening. Here's what was happening. We had a large percentage, a minority percentage, but significant percentage nonetheless, of a population of this country that was being told on a daily basis, you really don't matter. You're less than deserving of respect, less than deserving of dignity. You really don't matter. And that belief system, that weighing of value was reinforced on a daily basis with laws and actions that reinforced those beliefs constantly. And it instilled resentment, it instilled brokenness, it instilled pain, and that's what he saw all day, every day. And anybody else would have seen those. It's just some examples. If you're at the cash register and you hand the cashier a $20 bill, and they give you change as if you gave them a $10 bill. If you were African American or colored or Negro, as they said at the time, and the cashier was white, what would you say? You would say, "Thank you, sir." You were not allowed to have a conversation that said, "Hey, where's the rest of my money?" You are not allowed to have a conversation that asks for the remainder of the change. What if this? What if you're walking down the street as a male, and you're with your girlfriend, or you're with your wife, and a white male comes up to you and your girlfriend, your wife, your significant other, and starts talking to her as if you're not there. And they start saying things like, "Wow, you're a mighty pretty young lady. I sure wish you would come see me sometime." And they look at you in the eye and say, "You don't have a problem with me talking to your wife, do you?" What was your answer? The answer is supposed to be, "No, sir." The only answer you're allowed to have. There's a book that I just recently enjoyed called The Warmth of Other Suns, and it's written by Isabel Wilkerson. And she does a good job of describing the northern migration of African Americans from the South to the North, to the West, all over, and detailing the conditions that inspired people to just get out of town, to just leave. And one of the stories she tells is of how during World War I, African Americans were leaving to go to the North to take jobs, which meant that people on the fields were at a loss. They were in demand. They didn't have enough people in Florida, in particular, to pick the oranges off the orange groves. And so they insisted then that every able-bodied African American work full-day shifts at the orange groves to make sure that the crops got picked. And they reinforced this by saying things like, if you're in your house having worked your shift and there's still other people still working, they would come in your house and arrest you for what? Loitering. You could be arrested for loitering, for sitting in your couch in your own living room. There's another story that they told in the book, and this is important because as a judge, this one resonates. She tells a story of a man, there were wild turkeys. And the wild turkeys belonged to a white male who owned this property, but some sharecroppers were responsible for maintaining these wild turkeys. And every now and then these turkeys would fly off and be gone for a couple of days and they'd come back. Fly off for a couple of days and come back. Well, on this particular occasion, they flew off and they were gone. And they didn't come back. And people began to wonder where these turkeys had been stolen. Well, it wasn't too much longer before they just made up their mind. Yeah, these turkeys have been stolen. And there's a gentleman, an African-American fella, who had a reputation for stealing, so they became convinced that he was the one who stole these wild turkeys. So they went out at night, some folks, and they got their chains, and they grabbed them, beat them up real good, and took them to the jail. And you're sitting in jail, and about a day or so later, the turkeys flew in. So they went and got him out of jail, and they carried him back to the house, put him on the couch, and said, well, that'll teach you. And so this is important because we talk often about ways that we need to improve our criminal justice system. And yeah, if we can find ways to improve, let's improve. I'm all for it. But let's not talk about improving our criminal justice system as if we haven't made great improvements already. We ought to be able to identify improvements without condemning the huge progress that we've enjoyed and achieved, and that the ones of you who raise your hands have been instrumental in producing for our society. It's much different than it once was. But what is the impact of all this? Getting back to what we were talking about, what is the impact on a world that if you live in that world, well, that makes you want to beat your wife, right? You're not supposed to beat your wife, but that pent-up anger, and we don't have counseling skills and therapists, and so people acted out in wrong ways in response to that. There's alcoholism. There's all types of dysfunction that got masked, and yes, people did thrive, but there's a lot of brokenness. It was real bad. It was real bad. And so Dr. King and folks like him that joined up with him saw that. And then on the other side of the equation was this. What does it say about a soul that would treat people that way? How can you treat people that way and be a healthy person? What kind of acid, what kind of toxicity is in an environment that's in a person that allows them to feel free about lashing out towards somebody and dominating somebody and seeing them as less than human? What about the hatred that is in that person? And what about the country that sits back and lets that happen? What does it say about the country as a whole? And so that's what he saw. That's what he saw. Brokenness and hatred, brokenness and hatred. Now, this is where the faith comes in. What was it that we were supposed to have? What was it supposed to look like? Well, his Christian faith says, love the Lord with all your heart and soul and mind, love your neighbor as yourself, love your neighbor. And going back to the Bible, talking about who is your neighbor, well, he obviously will reflect on the story of the Good Samaritan, who was a person that was lying on the side of the road, had been robbed. A priest comes by, a Levite comes by, but ultimately it was a Samaritan, somebody of the other race, that comes and renders aid. That's what it's supposed to look like. We've got hatred and brokenness, love of our neighbor as the goal, and all you see is this huge gap. Huge gap. And so at that point, nonviolent social change begins to make sense. If you look at that landscape and you start bringing in nonviolent social change, it's the perfect solution. First of all, it's perfect because it's practical. It's practical. Andy Young, Ambassador Young, Mary Young said, it only makes sense to do it through nonviolent social change. We can't do it through violence. We don't have enough guns. They have more guns than we do. We weren't going to outgun anybody to accomplish the goals and objectives. So it was very practical. But more importantly, it was moral. It was the moral way to go about achieving those objectives. It returned good for evil. And that's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard to return good for evil. I know when I get that finger in the air when I'm driving through Atlanta, it's hard. You want to chase after folks, but it's just not worth it. I tell my kids it's just not worth it. But when you're suffering all these indignations, it's hard. And it showed the true ugliness. It showed the true hatred, the underbelly of segregation by remaining good and calm in the midst of all this. If we had reacted, then it would allow the viewing public to blame to blame the people involved in the movement. And even then, we were still called agitators. But it was the moral thing to do. And then more importantly, it was forward thinking. It was forward thinking because it was inclusive, it involved people of all races, people of all faiths, and began to show that we, in fact, can be at the table of brotherhood together. It sought the goal not by conquering, but by convicting, by tweaking and prodding the conscience of America. And the end goal was that we, at the end of the day, through our own consciousness, would sit at the table of brotherhood together with former slave owners, sons of former slaves and sons of former slave owners. And guess what? We're doing that on a daily basis. Now, here's the thing. I'm concerned that we don't really value the table of brotherhood as much as we should, that we don't recognize it as the gift that it really is. It's similar to, and maybe as important as the right to vote. We know that people died for us to have the right to vote. Well, people died for us to have the right to sit at the table of brotherhood, but do we value that? And one of the reasons why I think we don't value sitting at the table of brotherhood is because when you sit at the table, you look across and you see some people you don't like. Well, we weren't promised to like our brother. And in fact, you pick your friends, but you can't pick your family. And when you sit at the table of brotherhood, if you're like any other family, what do you do with your family? You argue. So we weren't guaranteed agreement. What we're guaranteed is access, the ability to talk these things out, to have some give and take. And it's important that we avail ourselves of these opportunities. Judge Hodges mentioned that I worked for Governor Perdue, and I didn't know Governor Perdue before I started working for him. And when I got the call about maybe talking to the team about joining, I talked to a lot of people. But the advice that I got that made the most sense was, it's hard to turn down a seat at the table. And the ability to sit down at the table with the governor's staff and sometimes the governor, and they turn around to you and ask you what you think, I wouldn't trade that in for anything. So we have to value sitting at the table. And when we value that, we do the work. We do the work. One of the things I saw at the Capitol was the folks that really got things done were folks that were willing to do the work. And Dr. King spoke of this. Again, we think about when he marched, that when we want to mimic Dr. King, we just get our bullhorn out and we start marching. No. In the letters to the Birmingham jail, letters from the Birmingham jail, there are 4 stages. There are 4 stages. The first stage was fact-finding. You had to know what you were talking about. You couldn't engage in rumors. You had to get there, talk to people firsthand, get the accounts. You can't afterwards say, oh, my bad, my mistake. There's no room for that. The second stage was negotiation. You actually pick up the phone, ask for a meeting, talk to the people. You don't shame them up publicly for no reason. You go talk to them, give them a chance to find some common ground. And this is when amazing things happen, more so today than then. But when we're at the table of brotherhood, it's a lot different conversation than we're writing letters to the editor back and forth. And so this negotiation was very important. And then after negotiation, the next step, which I love, is purification. Purification because now it's about to really hit. And now I'm about to march, and now I know that I'm going to get a beat down. And I have to return good for evil, and I'm not up to doing that. And I got to get ready emotionally, spiritually, and I got to get a beat down. I don't feel like getting beat down today. It sounds like it hurts. So that purification process had to take place, and then there was action. Only then did we get to the point where we marched and took action. So there's a caution to doing this way. When you sit at the table of brotherhood, a couple of things can happen. A lot of them are great. There's a risk of being betrayed. That's not new. The risk of being betrayed at the table of brotherhood is not new. In fact, the first table of brotherhood there is betrayal. We know that as communion, where Jesus said, one of you will betray me today. And then he said to Judas, what you do, go and do quickly. And so we don't run from betrayal. If we try to live up to this standard, we don't run from betrayal. But we do strive to get to the point where we say, forgive them, for he knows not what he does. So it's a challenge to us to be idealistic, not naive. Naive means you don't know the dangers that are coming. Idealistic means you're aware of the dangers, but you go anyway. But we honor our forefathers and those in this room by being willing to call each other up when we have a difference, being willing to disagree, but respect one another by sitting together at the table of brotherhood. I'll close with this, and this is again from Dr. King's letters from a Birmingham jail. He says, let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away, and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities, and in some not too distant tomorrow, the radiant stars of love and brotherhood will shine over our great nation with all their scintillating beauty. May God continue to bless this city, this state, and this nation. Thank you for your celebration.
As the Chief Justice said, when we started law school together in 1988, we had no idea that we'd both be where we are, but I want to tell you something. The state of our judiciary is in great hands, being led by Chief Justice Harold Melton, and I'm going to have the honor of hearing him deliver that state of the judiciary tomorrow morning in the Capitol. Thank you for all you do. Thanks. As we close out, I want Frank Wilson, the Executive Director of the Albany Civil Rights Institute, to, in 1 minute, tell us why this is important, because the beneficiary of tonight is the Albany Civil Rights Institute. There's only 1 minute left.
Thank you. Your presence here tonight allows the Civil Rights Institute to continue doing the work that it does, to provide the tools to tell the story, to keep the history alive. Because the people who does not know its history are bound to repeat it. It's important that you do so. While I have this opportunity, let me also share with you, 1 week from today at the Old Mount Zion Church, we will honor one of our sheroes, Ola Mae Quarterman, who was to Albany what Rosa Parks was to Montgomery. And on next Thursday, we will have the all-county, all-city concert, all the high schools, public and private, the Albany Symphony Orchestra, and the All Saints House of Worship Choir. And it is the best price in town. It's free $99. So we expect to see you there and continue to support the Civil Rights Institute, because the life that you save may be just your own. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Frank, for the work you do, and I invite all of you here tonight and all of you at home to please visit the Albany Civil Rights Institute. It's an amazing collection of history, a history that we all need to know, and a history that we need to have our children know. Thank you for being here tonight. We'll be here again next year, probably at Albany State. Thank you and have a great night.
Watching the WALB News 10 special presentation of the King Celebration live from Albany State University's West Campus. Now, back to your regularly scheduled programming.